Hello and welcome back to stage one. We are continuing with API products and markets and general API design. And we have here Chris Phillips from IBM, straight from Hersley. And Chris, first of all, you told me the best ever marketing phrase for Hersley, which is, I mean, a lovely place. I've been there, but you had this thing that it has the best butchers around. And that was the thing that I didn't find in any of the official brochures, but lovely place.
Wow.
Thank you for being here. And you're going to share some wisdom about how good are your APIs. That is thought-provoking. So are you ready?
I'm always ready. And these are really good butchers. You've got to support the local businesses.
Always ready, scout. Okay. So, hey, slides are up. Everything is good. Go ahead.
Right. So thank you again. It's the first time I've had two sessions at the single API days. So yesterday I presented on governing large estates. Today I'm here to talk about how good are your APIs, really? And this is a question that nearly everybody's asking themselves these days, because APIs have been around long enough and everyone now has an API estate. But is it any good? And so that's what we're going to try and cover in the next few minutes. Who am I? Very briefly, I'm an IBM SDSM or Senior Technical Staff Member and an IBM Master Inventor. I'm considered an API guru by the sales organization here. I do a lot of work going around the world advising clients at both governance and technically how to use our products, as well as how to look at APIs estates themselves. Got interesting stuff on my blog, so people like to read up on. I've just done a bit on monetization yesterday. And I don't use Twitter, but LinkedIn seems to be my business social media of choice. So 1 second. So we're going to jump straight in. What makes a good API? What makes a good API? That is the core question. And so let me just reply very simply. Two things make a good API. It has to be accessible. Someone has to go and find the API and be able to use it. People can't find your APIs, they're not good. Second thing is, it needs to meet the need of your consumers. That's it. That's a good API. You meet these two requirements, you're covered. Yes, a little bit vague. But how do you apply these? How do you quantify these two things? So the session and the agenda I'm going to be covering today is, how is API goodness measured for you? And I'm not going to say this is the golden path. Because this will be different depending on your business, your industry, how you work, your principles. But these are the considerations you need to make as and when you're addressing and looking at how everything fits together. Now, I'm more than happy for questions as we go. Please ask questions, and I'm going to ask the team here to just shout out when the questions come through so I don't miss them. So thank you. So the first thing to do is you need to look at your rate of change of adoption. Rate and change of adoption. How many people are coming on board? How many new API consumers are you having? What is your call volume? Is your call volume increasing? Is it decreasing? Are you losing existing consumers? And even if it's only exposed internally inside your business, enough companies have come to me and said, hey, we've got this API Strat form, but no one likes to use it because they rather do this. And that means, and they say, how do we force people to use our platform? And the response is, you make the platform suitable for your consumers. Minimizing API development and deployment time, tracking usage. And the last thing is, it doesn't matter. And I hear this quite more often than I'd be like, not half the time, but 10-20% of the cases, is they don't care if that platform is good enough. They're doing it because they were told to do it. And these are the 4 topics I'm going to cover in this session today. So let's start at the top, the rate and change of adoption, aka keeping the barriers of entry low and not betraying your existing consumers. So here's some questions for you to ask yourselves. How much does it cost for you to onboard a new consumer? That's both how much does it cost for you to have a consumer find you and start using your APIs, or how much does it cost you to reach out to your consumers to get them to start using your APIs? How much does it cost then for you to keep that person, keep that consumer? How much time and investment are you putting in to make sure your consumers don't leave you to go elsewhere or do their own thing? And how much does it cost a consumer to continue using your APIs? So if we're looking at this, if it's costing you 2 people to onboard each consumer, one to publicize it and get people to see it, and another person to do the paperwork to onboard someone, that's very expensive. If you are having to have developers continually working with your consumers in order for them to be happy, that's very expensive to maintain that relationship. And if your consumer sees your APIs as they need continually developing what they're doing in order to stay there and keep using you, and they have to commit full-time a developer or 2 developers to using your APIs because of the changes you're making, and factoring in things like monetization costs if you want to monetize your APIs, is this going to be in their interest to keep using your APIs? So some good practices I'd recommend around this. Good development practices and principles. Yes, we all say we do them, but get your version control right. Watch the session I did yesterday if you want to. It has a section on versioning. I won't go into details of it here. But also stop with breaking changes. Every time you make a breaking change in your interfaces, you're going to start making consumers question if you are the right partner for them. And at the end of the day, this is a partnership. And yes, it's easy to say, well, we'll just have both APIs live at the same time. We'll have the new one and the old one. But that does not scale. And you will end up having more and more APIs for your team to maintain and manage. Have a developer portal. Now, again, this is obvious. Everyone says about developer portal. I've seen this probably louder than most people. But by having a self-service developer portal, you allow people to sign up themselves. You remove that back office cost. You remove that latency of someone having to go through and manage. And even if it's just to get them onboarded in, and so they can start playing around with a free tier, you want to make that initial playground and sandbox as cheap and as easy for your consumers as possible. So as soon as they request it, they can start using it. And take into consideration the value of making a breaking change versus the cost of the consumer. If you are changing a single attribute so it's not backwards compatible, that will upset a consumer, but they'll probably survive and move on. If you are changing the entire data structure and the requests for an API, they're probably going to look at a competitor or look at elsewhere for how they can do this. So make sure you're always thinking like your consumer. And the second one is monetizations. If you are charging your consumers to use your APIs, what is the cost? So what is the return? So for example, so if you are charging your consumers £10 a month, $10 a month, 10 whatever you want to use your APIs, and they are generating $1,000 of business out of it, that's brilliant. But if you're charging them $2,000 a month to use your APIs, but they're only developing $1,000 of business out of it, then why would they use it? So monetization is for me not charging for API usage is not a pattern I'd like. Though I do recognize there's a time and place. And so I've just put an article out yesterday on my thoughts around monetization on my blog. Minimizing API development and development time, aka decreasing pressures on your development teams and allowing developers to focus on the build. So I'm fairly sure here, no one would say they have a developer team that is large enough to meet their lofty goals. And though they may on paper have sufficient developers, they are always being pulled into other problems, such as addressing complaints from consumers, assisting consumers, working with other parts of the business to develop and grow. And also we have generally development turnover is rife. It's not as high as other businesses, but you do expect to see a development team change over. And every time someone leaves and someone else comes in, there is that latency and lag while they reskill up on what's been seen. And so the questions I always get my customers to ask themselves is, where do their consumers go for support? Do they have a phone number for someone in the development team? Do they go through internal messaging? Do they have a forum? Do they have Wikipedia? Do they go to Stack Overflow? How do they get support for your APIs? Where can consumers test their APIs? Is there a nice portal, possibly a developer one, where they can plug in all the details and test the APIs work the way they expect? So not just read documentation, but also be able to play without having to build an application to check the API works as expected. And how do you cope with your developer churn? How do you cope with your developer turnover? I.e., as I said, people leave, people come back, people change. How do you ensure that has minimal impact to allow your developers to focus on usually what they want to do, which is building new, cool, and exciting function? So the good practices around this, I would say, are clear and centralized documentation. Now, we all know this is an obvious one. Everyone has said documentation since 1,000 years ago. People said design and document something. But you've got to understand, you have at least two types of documentation you need. You need the internal document to explain to your own developers how stuff works. And you need your external documents to explain how your consumers. Now, there is a lot of overlap there, and you may say it's all overlap, and that depends on a number of things. But you need to provide this so people can be self-sufficient. And also, you need clear error codes and reasons. And we have a great HTTP standards where you have your 200s, your 404s, your 401s, your 418s, and no one should ever forget the 418s. They are the most important. But not everybody uses them properly. And the code only is half the battle. The reasons need to be set so you can quickly see, okay, 404 not found, that's fine. 200 success, okay. But how many people throw in 400s and 500s without any explanation? And that is where people get frustrated and start, again, questioning the partnership when they feel stuck. Consumer testing tool, I covered briefly already. But also, when we deploy our APIs, we should be testing them in the same way that we JUnit anything else. And not just the functional, but the specification themselves. Is the description set? Are examples set in the specification? So when the consumer comes to read them, they get this information up front. Is it in the correct language? Are the paths following a standardized, consistent approach between all your APIs? Is the specification implemented following the standards or the certification process of your organization? Are we providing something that follows the same patterns that of everything else? And frequently, what we're seeing is these days is you see now all large organizations are consolidating all of their API strategies into one or two, well, hopefully one project. And they're bringing together hundreds or thousands of APIs together that were all built independently by wider teams. And they're now trying to work out how do we piece together this structure so we have one pattern, we're portraying one story. We're not trying to portray just what that developer thought he should do. And again, it needs to come back to the consumer. So to summarize this slide slightly, have as much information as possible to help your consumers get the support they need without needing to reach out directly to the development team. Make sure your consumers understand, have a way of playing without necessarily implementing the APIs, but also make sure your development team have enough information to help themselves when they bring in and take out developers as they go through. Pick up the pace a little bit now. Usage tracking, justify your existence, validate your strategy. For both providers and consumers, it's not how many people are using your APIs or applications? Sorry for the typo. Because if no one is using your API or applications, is it worth the cost of it existing? And you might say, well, what's the cost? It still has to be maintained. It still has to be considered. It still has to be controlled and governed. And if no one is using it and you have no prediction of using it, then why do you have it? If you don't know if anyone is using it, that is the worst case scenario. Because if you cannot justify why something exists, and you cannot control it, and you cannot inform people if it's not going to be used anymore, then you're stuck. You can't make changes. Which of your consumers generate the most traffic? Understand who you should be partnering. You generally want to partner with the consumers who are using you the most, who are backing and investing the most into using your platforms, again, whether internal or external. partner with these people, understand what they're trying to do to make sure you're growing to benefit those people as well. Don't just try and do, oh, we got this cool data that one person wants, so let's expose it. There are a good reason to do that, but at the same time, don't forget the partnerships involved. And what patterns of usage can you see? You may expose 30 different sort of products, APIs as products, but is there only 2 of them being used? Are people only interested in one part? And then the question is, then do you invest in that one part, or do you invest in the other areas? And there isn't a yes or no answer there. That is, you've got to look in to see what's available. So the good practice here is analytics, analytics, analytics. You want to get the analytics available to both your consumers and providers for what is being used. Consumers want to know why they're being, what if they're hitting their limits or not. Providers want to know if anyone's actually using their system. Offload the analytics to a centralized data warehouse where possible, so it can be used for historical, not just 1, 2, 3 months. So you look over after the last 12 months, we've seen these changes and we've seen these pattern changes. And it's this historical data that's important. But most importantly, analyze the analytics and understand it. Don't just collect it to tick a box, because then it's really expensive. Make sure you get the benefit. Make sure you look at it, take a step back. And all these things are obvious. But how many people here really analyze the historical patterns of how their APIs have been using and how they've growth and what is exciting and interesting? I'm moving on to the last section here. It doesn't matter, we were told to do it by the business. AKA, we have no requirements. AKA, someone told us API strategy expected with no success criteria. And this is the easiest one to talk about. You're going to fail. With no requirements, there is a near zero chance of justifying success. And anyone who is just building an API platform because it is the right thing to do right now needs to take a step back and understand both the business and technical reasons for doing this, because you will not justify what's going on. And that is so no matter what the API is, if there's no strategy around it or there's no success criteria around it, that it's not going to be a good API, because you're not meeting the objectives, because there are no objectives formed. And again, this happens way more than I'd like to admit. So very briefly here, in 70 minutes, I've gone through and I sort of explained what everyone here is thinking. And I don't think I've shown anything here that is going to surprise anyone, but hopefully rekindles ideas into their thoughts. And that's the aim here, is to give you sort of a chance to take this away and go back to those core principles. And everyone can relate to everything we've said here, I'm fairly sure, in one way or another. So let me finish with one final question. And the question that you'll take away, you'll think about this, given the information I've just said. How good are your APIs, really? So thanks everyone for listening to me. Any questions?
Well, I'm been looking at the chat and there are not yet any questions, but I have a few kind of comments and questions to you. So thanks for kind of summarizing a lot of the stuff that we discussed in the previous talks. And I think that one of the kind of key points that you made was both that you need to think about who are you actually serving with these APIs and what's the business reason, but also that you have to have the matching analytics. And I would like to kind of, from a story, to ask you that one of the first experiences that I had with IBM API Connect when it had just been launched as a new product was that we were going to production and we were having so many issues with, like, randomly some users not being able to use the APIs, and we didn't have the analytics set up in the gateway yet at that point because there was a rush, so no analytics. and then when we started seeing the technical data in the analytics, then that was one thing, but then to understand really what was the business case behind those analytics, what was not happening and what was happening, and are we reaching the goals? Do you have any kind of wisdom to that, how to make sure that your APIs are actually doing what they should be doing from a business point of view?
And the only wisdom I have is the obvious wisdom, which is
did you hear my question, Chris?
Yes, I do. Yes. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Chris?
I can hear you.
Hello.
Hi, I can hear you.
Is there a lag, or did you hear me?
I heard you fine.
I think
1 second.
we might have lost connection somehow.
Test. No, my microphone is fine, so I'm going to talk, assuming someone can hear.
Hello, Chris.
Hi.
Okay.
So I am going to talk.
There was maybe some video problem earlier, so maybe we have lost connection. So I think that we can move over maybe to the. Okay, good.
So I'm going to answer your question, Majuka, and you won't be able to hear my answer. So this is going to be great fun. My advice here is always look back to the first principles. Understand why you're exposing. Are you exposing APIs to generate more sales?
Yes.
Are you exposing APIs
There's a lag, but I can hear you.
Are you exposing APIs to explain and get more visibility and success?
Yes,
and look at what the APIs are going through. So you're now talking over me, so I don't know if you're responding to what I'm saying or to something else. So it always comes back to, with every API being built, understand why that API is being built, both really from a technical and a business side, and be able to refer back to it, but also look, has that requirement changed over the last year? Has that requirement grown? Has that requirement shrunk? And understand exactly the need and all that good stuff. So the analytics here, for me, is critical to be able to justify success, and also to be able to understand where the value from the platform is. So is that okay, Jamie? I don't know how big the lag is. Okay, well, I think we've lost you then. So we've got 3 minutes left. If there's any more questions in the comments, please ask. In that case, Fabio, I assume you can hear me. If you just confirm in our private chat that you can hear me still, and it's not my disconnect.
It was
you're
me.
Back again.
I'm back. There was some internet connection issue. Magic.
Always the way. I can't wait to be face to face again.
Yeah. So I hope you managed to answer the question. I heard some of it, but there was a lag. So I think that I'll check if there are any other questions in this. Everybody else luckily heard you. So
great.
No other questions visible for now in the chat. So maybe if you have time, you can check if there's later something. So with that, I'll leave you and have a lovely day in Hursley. I'm so jealous. I'd like to be there again. So,
it is nice here. It is nice here.
Yeah, it is nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.